So before handing things over to Hannah and Eva, I'll walk through our agenda for today. First, we will start out by sharing how the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund will work in fiscal year 2024. Next, we'll provide an overview of the Child Development Facility Payroll Funding Formula, which is also known as the CDF Payroll Funding Formula, and minimum salary requirements. Then we'll provide a few examples of how a facility's CDF payroll funding formula award is calculated and have time for Q&A before wrapping up and sharing next steps. Please note that this session is geared towards child development facility leaders. If you are an early childhood educator, we will have more information for individuals who are employed at child development facilities later this summer. Again, please feel free to submit questions at any time during today's session using the Q&A box. And I will now hand things over to Eva.
Thank you, Julia. And hello to everyone who has joined this afternoon's information session. I'm excited to be here with you all today. To begin today's session, I'll share some background on how the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund, also known as the Pay Equity Fund, will work in FY24. As Julia shared, please feel free to submit questions during the presentation using the Q&A feature. As I'm sure many of you know, in fiscal years 2022 and 2023 of the Pay Equity Fund, OSSI partnered with AidKit to distribute direct payments to eligible early childhood educators. In accordance with this, in accordance with the recommendations of the Early Childhood Educator Equitable Compensation Task Force, in fiscal year 2024, OSSI will shift to distributing pay equity funds directly to child development facilities to increase compensation for early educators through a child development facility payroll funding formula. This means that in fiscal year 2024, early childhood educators will no longer receive direct payments through AidKit. Early childhood educators will receive funds as part of their regular paycheck from their employer. Next slide, please. To receive a child development facility payroll funding formula award, also referred to as a CDF payroll funding formula award, child development facilities must be licensed by OSSI and agree to pay eligible early childhood educators by position and degree salaries that meet or exceed minimum salaries established by OSSI for fiscal year 2024. We will dive into both the CDF payroll funding formula and minimum salaries shortly. Participating in FY24 of the Pay Equity Fund is optional. However, we highly encourage facilities to take part in the program. Child development facilities that wish to participate in the Pay Equity Fund in fiscal year 2024 must opt into the program. And we'll share more information about the process for opting into the program this summer with facilities. Facilities that receive the CDF payroll funding formula awards are to use the funds to meet minimum salary requirements for lead and assistant teachers, pay staff wages or compensation for additional early childhood educators and other child development facility employees, pay cost of health and other fringe benefits for early childhood educators and other child development facility employees, pay administrative costs associated with implementing the minimum salary requirements and or meeting requirements related to the Pay Equity Fund, pay direct operating expenses of the facility associated with providing care and early education services to children. With that overview, I'll now hand things over to Hannah, who will share more information about the CDF payroll funding formula and the minimum salaries for FY24. Hannah?
Thank you so much, Eva. And hello, everyone. I am Hannah Matthews. I am the Director of Policy Planning and Research in the Division of Early Learning, and very happy to be joining you all today. By now you have heard those terms, the CDF payroll funding formula and minimum salary requirements, more than a few times. So today we're going to walk through exactly what those mean. Let's start with the CDF, Child Development Facility Payroll Funding Formula, or the CDF payroll funding formula. This is a formula used to determine the payment amounts to be received by a facility that chooses to participate in fiscal year 24 of the Pay Equity Fund. The formula was developed based on multiple sources, which include recommendations of the Early Childhood Educator Equitable Compensation Task Force, facility-specific data in databases housed by OSSI, the Division of Early Learning Licensing tool, known as DELT, the 2022 DC Child Care Provider Survey. That was a survey we sent to childcare facilities back in the fall, and OSSI's 2023 cost modeling analysis, as well as input from external stakeholders. Next slide, please. The CDF payroll funding formula is made up of 3 components, and you can see them here on the slide: the base award, an administrative enhancement, and an equity adjustment. We're going to talk through all of those in detail. The base award is the core. Can you go back to that slide, please? Thanks. The base award is the core component of the formula. Facilities will be awarded a wage supplement that is the difference between current salaries of teachers, as derived by OSSI, and the minimum salaries required for each role and credential per employee. And we'll cover that in detail. The administrative enhancement is 15% of the base award. This is to account for increases in mandatory payroll taxes for facilities and other possible increased expenses for participating in the program. And then finally, we have an equity adjustment. This is provided for facilities caring for children receiving subsidies. Such facilities may receive up to 40% of the base award based on their subsidy enrollment as a percent of its licensed capacity. These 3 components are added together to come up with the total CDF payroll funding formula award. Facilities that opt into fiscal year 24 of the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund will receive quarterly payments calculated using this CDF payroll funding formula. OSSI will use facility-specific data, including the facility's staff records and licensed capacity in DELT and subsidy enrollment reported in the subsidy system, to determine the facility's payment amount. The data used to calculate the formula will be pulled from DELT and the subsidy system quarterly on a set date for all facilities. OSSI will communicate these dates to child development facilities prior to the launch of the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund in fiscal year 24. Now I will dive further into each of these components shortly, but first I want to just address the minimum salary requirements. Next slide, please. Child development facilities that participate in the Pay Equity Fund must agree to pay their teachers and assistant teachers salaries that meet or exceed the minimum salaries seen here on this slide. For the purposes of the Pay Equity Fund, an assistant teacher is defined as an assistant teacher, a Montessori assistant teacher, a PKEEP assistant teacher, or an associate home caregiver. A lead teacher is a teacher, a Montessori teacher, a home caregiver, or an expanded home caregiver. As you can see on this slide, the minimum salary is based on an educator's role and the credential they hold. The minimum salaries are required for full-time year-round staff. Childcare programs with staff who work part-time or part-year may pay hourly wages or salaries that are equivalent to or greater than the hourly wages listed on this slide. The minimum salaries for fiscal year 24 are consistent with the updated DCPS salary scale that was approved by the DC Council in February of this year. We'll drop a link into the chat with more information on those minimum salaries. Next slide, please. The required minimum salary and the corresponding wage supplement will be based on the highest credential or degree held by an educator. The wage supplement is used to calculate each facility's base award. For lead teachers, to qualify for the BA wage supplement, they must have a bachelor's degree or higher in early childhood education with greater than, or a bachelor's degree with greater than or equal to 24 credits hours in early childhood education. Such teachers must be paid the minimum salary for a teacher with a BA. To qualify for the AA wage supplement, a teacher must have an associate's degree in early childhood education or an associate's degree with greater than or equal to 24 credit hours in early childhood education. And again, they must be paid that minimum salary for a teacher with an AA. To qualify for the CDA wage supplement, a teacher must have a CDA or 48 credit hours with greater than or equal to 15 hours completed in early childhood education. Moving on to the assistant teachers. Similarly, to qualify for the associate wage supplement, they must have an associate's degree or higher. To qualify for the CDA wage supplement, they must have a CDA. And to qualify for the less than CDA wage supplement, an assistant teacher would have less than a CDA and be paid the corresponding minimum salary. Next slide, please. Just a few more important notes here related to the salary requirements. The first is that child development facilities must meet the minimum salary requirements through fixed salaries or wages. The funds received from OSSI are to help facilities meet the costs of those minimum salary requirements. This means a child development facility may not meet the requirements through one-time bonuses or lump sum payments. And finally, facilities that do not receive CDF payroll formula funds, those that opt not to participate in the program, are not required to pay their staff the required minimum salaries for the pay equity fund. But please keep in mind that they must comply with other district and federal laws and requirements regarding worker wages and hours that apply to all employers, including the Fair Shot Minimum Wage Act of 2016, and for childcare providers participating in the district's childcare subsidy program, the Living Wage Act of 2006. Now, with all of that background, let's go a little bit deeper into how the components of the CDF payroll funding formula will be calculated. Here's the payroll formula again. As we walked through a bit earlier, there are three components that make up the award: the base award, the administrative enhancement, and the equity adjustment. We're going to dig into each of these, starting with the base award. So how is the base award calculated? Here you can see a graphic representation of the base award calculation. It will be calculated by multiplying the number of teachers in each facility, in a single facility, based on their role and the credential or degree that they hold, multiplied by the corresponding wage supplement, and then a sum of the total. I'll explain the wage supplement on the next slide. For now, let me tell you that the number of teachers and their credential levels are based on staffing data reported by a facility in the Division of Early Learning Licensing Tool, or DELT. So for each teacher and each assistant teacher with a degree or a credential, facilities will receive a corresponding wage supplement. Next slide, please. What is the wage supplement? The wage supplement is the difference between the average salary and the minimum salary requirement for a teacher, again, based on their role and their credential. The average teacher salary is based on responses to that childcare provider survey that I mentioned that we conducted last fall in partnership with DC Childcare Connections and Prenatal to 5 Fiscal Strategies. Many of you completed this survey, which we're grateful for, and it helped us to better understand average salaries of current teachers. The wage supplement for each role is a fixed amount. We cannot tailor it to the specific salary level of an individual facility's teaching staff. As you can see in the chart, the wage supplement for an educator who is classified as an assistant teacher, which again would be an assistant teacher, a Montessori assistant teacher, or a PKEEP assistant teacher, or an associate home caregiver. For such assistant teachers with credentials less than a CDA, the wage supplement is $2,329. For an assistant teacher with a CDA, it is $9,470. And for an assistant teacher with an associate degree or higher, it is $12,726. The wage supplement for a lead teacher, which again is anyone in the role of teacher, Montessori teacher, home caregiver, or expanded home caregiver. Any of those teachers with a CDA credential, the wage supplement would be $8,503. For a lead teacher with an associate's degree, it is $18,079. And for a lead teacher with a bachelor's degree or higher, it is $29,344. So the facility will receive a wage supplement for each teacher that corresponds to those amounts. This is the amount the facility will receive in their base award. The next component, next slide please, is the administrative enhancement. This is 15% of the base award. It provides funds for increases in mandatory payroll taxes and other increased expenses experienced by facilities. Next slide. The final component then is the equity adjustment. The equity adjustment equals up to 40% of the base award based on the facility's subsidy enrollment as a share of its licensed capacity. So we calculate that by multiplying the facility's subsidy enrollment as a percent of its licensed capacity by 40% of the base award. This equity adjustment is intended to direct increased funding to child development facilities serving families and communities with fewer economic resources. Facilities that do not participate in the child care subsidy program will not receive an equity adjustment to their base award. So they will have the base award and the administrative enhancement, but not the equity adjustment. Next slide. Now let's walk through a few examples of how a facility's CDF payroll funding formula award will be calculated. We're going to get very specific here and walk through an example. First, using a child development center. This center you see here has opted in to the fiscal year 24 of the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. The facility has completed an agreement with OSSI to participate in the program. On the day that the CDF formula is calculated, information from DELT shows that the center employs 8 lead teachers. 2 teachers have bachelor's degree in early childhood education. 4 teachers have associate degrees in early childhood education, and 2 teachers hold their CDAs. This facility also employs 6 assistant teachers. 2 assistant teachers have associate degrees in early childhood education. 2 assistant teachers have their CDAs, and 2 assistant teachers have less than a CDA, so they've not completed a CDA. The center has a licensed capacity of 52 children, and information from the subsidy system shows that the facility enrolls 20 children receiving childcare subsidies. So, as a reminder again, here's the CDF payroll funding formula. First, we're going to calculate the base award. Here we have a breakdown of the teacher and assistant teachers employed at the facility by role and credential. Remember, the facility has 2 teachers with CDAs, 4 teachers with associate degrees, 2 teachers with bachelor's degrees, 2 assistant teachers with less than a CDA, 2 assistant teachers with CDAs, and 2 assistant teachers with associate degrees. This information can be found inputted in the column on the far left. This is just the number of teachers in each role. We then factor in the wage supplement by multiplying the number of teachers in each role and with each credential by the corresponding wage supplement. The wage supplement for each role and credential can be found in the middle left column. And as you can see, we are just multiplying across the rows. At the top, 2 teachers with a CDA are multiplied times the CDA wage supplement of $8,503, equaling $17,006, and so on down the rows. Finally, we add each role's subtotal together to get a base award of $197,060. So that base award is the sum total of that middle right dark blue column. Next slide. So we have our base award. This is the core component of the CDF payroll funding formula award. Now that we've calculated it, we can calculate the administrative enhancement. To do that, we multiply the base award, $197,060, by 15%. And you can see there the administrative enhancement is $29,559. Finally, the third component of the payroll funding formula award is the equity adjustment. As a reminder, the facility has a licensed capacity of 52 children and has 20 children enrolled in the subsidy program as of the day that OSSI calculated the formula award. To calculate the equity adjustment, we divide the facility's subsidy enrollment by its licensed capacity. So 20 divided by 52, which is approximately 0.38, 38%. We then multiply that number by the base award, which was $197,060. And we get approximately $75,792. We then multiply that amount by 40%, which gives us our equity adjustment. In this case, $30,000, $30,317. Next slide. So with our 3 formula components now calculated, we can calculate the total award amount for this facility. As a reminder, because CDF payroll funding formula awards are made quarterly, the total amount will be multiplied by 25%. So adding the base award, the administrative enhancement, and the equity adjustment, we get a total award of $256,936. When multiplied by 25%, the quarterly payment comes to $64,234. Because we will calculate the payroll formula every quarter, your quarterly payment will not necessarily be the same each time. If there are changes in subsidy enrollment or the number of teachers employed in the facility, the award will recalculate and you will receive a quarter of the award calculated in each quarter. This is intended to help facilities with changes that may occur over the course of the year. Next slide. Now let's walk through an example for a child development home. In this example, an expanded child development home enters into an agreement with OSSI to participate in fiscal year 24 of the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. The facility has 1 expanded home caregiver with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, and it employs 1 associate caregiver with an associate's degree in early childhood education and an associate caregiver with a child development associate. The facility has a licensed capacity of 9 children and enrolls 4 children who are receiving childcare subsidies. Next slide. Okay, here we go. Here's how we calculate the CDF payroll funding formula. First, we calculate the base award. Next slide, please. Here's the breakdown again of the teacher and assistant teachers employed in this home, in this example, by role and credential. The home has 1 teacher with a bachelor's degree in early childhood education, 1 assistant teacher with a CDA, and 1 assistant teacher with an associate's degree. So we're plugging those numbers into the appropriate role. Because the facility does not employ any teachers with a CDA or associate or any associate teachers with less than a CDA, we'll just have a 0 in those boxes. As we did in the previous example, we then multiply the number of teachers in each role and credential by the corresponding wage supplement and sum the total. We add together all of those subtotals to get a base award of $51,540. Next slide. Now that we have the base award, we can calculate the administrative enhancement. We multiply the base award by 15% to get $7,731. Finally, we calculate the equity adjustment. In this example, the home has a licensed capacity of 9 children and currently has 4 children enrolled in the subsidy program. So again, calculating the equity adjustment, we divide the facility's subsidy enrollment by its licensed capacity. In this case, 4 divided by 9, which is approximately 0.44 or 44%. We then multiply that number by the base award, which was $51,540. And we get approximately $22,907, which is then multiplied by 40%, giving us a final equity adjustment of $9,163. And with our 3 formula components calculated, now we can calculate again that total award. We add the base award, the administrative enhancement, and the equity adjustment to get a total award of $68,434. When we multiply it by 25%, we find the quarterly payment that this child development home will receive of $17,109.
Thank you, Hannah and Eva, for that overview and information of the CDF payroll funding formula and the minimum salaries. We'll now move into the Q&A portion of today's session. So please continue to submit questions in the chat. Let's see, our first question, can child development facilities that participate in fiscal year 24 of the program pass funds onto staff in the form of a bonus rather than a raise in their pay rate?
No, the answer to that is that they cannot. Child development facilities participating in this fiscal year of the Pay Equity Fund will need to meet minimum salary requirements for eligible teachers and assistant teachers through fixed pay raises. So these should be the new salaries or hourly wages of staff in your childcare facility.
Thank you, Hannah. Let's see, our next question, and I know today is attended by a lot of facility leaders, so this one is popular. Are directors, assistant directors, and administrative staff eligible to receive funds in fiscal year 24?
So it's a good question. ASSE is implementing the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund in accordance with recommendations of the Early Childhood Educator Equitable Compensation Task Force and, of course, the authorizing legislation. The task force did not recommend expanding the Pay Equity Fund to directors, assistant directors, or administrative staff. As such, these staff types will not be included in the payroll funding formula and will not be included when calculating a child development facilities funding award. That said, we do want to let you know that child development facilities have discretion in how they spend their funding award. As long as they are meeting the minimum salary requirements for those eligible teachers and assistant teachers, then they may use funds to compensate additional staff and for other operating expenses of the facility. So that could include directors and others' salaries.
Thank you. Let's see, another question. We're getting some questions about the process for opting in and then the timing for that and when folks would receive their payments, or facilities would receive their quarterly payments. So what does a facility need to do to opt into the program? And is there any information on timing that's available yet?
Good question. I know folks are eager to find out this information. All facilities that participate in the Pay Equity Fund will need to enter into an agreement with OSSI to participate. For those facilities that already receive childcare subsidy funds, this is similar to the childcare subsidy agreement that providers enter into with OSSI. We will have more information about the agreement and the timing and how to opt in this summer. So it's coming soon.
And we're getting some questions around if staff type changes or if a early childhood educator receives a new credential. So if a program either has, and other questions also similar, if subsidy enrollment changes. So if a program that receives an equity adjustment based on subsidy enrollment will the equity adjustment change quarterly if changes occur in enrollment? Would that be a retroactive enrollment increase in that quarter, or will funds have to be returned to OSSI if enrollment were to decrease?
Right. This is a great question. So OSSI recognizes that the enrollment in a facility fluctuates throughout the year. So to address that, that's the reason that we are calculating that payroll funding formula award 4 times a year, so on a quarterly basis. That means that the award itself may change each quarter depending on the number of children enrolled. Similarly, if the number of teachers change, then the quarterly award will change. We will recalculate it each quarter. However, OSSI will not make adjustments to the quarterly payment amount between those quarters or after the quarterly deadline that is prescribed by OSSI. Facilities will not need to return funds. We will issue those funds 4 times a year, but we will not make changes to that payment amount between quarters.
And similarly, related to the education requirements that go into effect for most staff types this coming December, are waivers going to be made available for staff for the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund in fiscal year 24?
So the required minimum salaries and the corresponding wage supplement will be based on the highest credential or degree currently held by an educator. Waivers will not be made available for staff related to the Pay Equity Fund. Of course, we note that waivers are available for staff related to the education requirements for the early childhood workforce that take effect in December. Waivers issued to staff as part of the education requirements do not apply to the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund. For example, a lead teacher who holds a CDA and has a waiver for the education requirement as they're working on achieving their associate's degree, that teacher would be counted as a teacher with a CDA for the purposes of the wage supplement and calculating the base award.
Thank you. Some questions around opting out and opting in. One question we received: if a child development facility participates in the subsidy program, are they required to participate in the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund?
Facilities are not required to participate in the Pay Equity Fund. We highly encourage participation, as this will be a source of revenue to be able to increase wages for child development facility teachers and assistant teachers, but participating in the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund is voluntary.
And if a facility decides to opt out, are they still required to meet those minimum salaries that are detailed in the fiscal year 24 minimum salaries and salary scale document that we shared?
Only facilities participating in the Pay Equity Fund will be required to meet those minimum salary requirements.
And let's see, another variation of this. If a facility decides that they do not want to participate in fiscal year 24, where OSSI is distributing the funds to the facility to then include as part of their employees' paychecks, can their staff receive supplemental payments through aid kit like they have in the past?
No, the supplemental payments will no longer be in place after fiscal year 23. So the only way to receive pay equity funds is to participate in the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund in fiscal year 24. A facility must opt into the program in order for staff to receive increased salaries, but there will be no supplemental payments.
Okay. And we have some questions around overtime pay. So are facilities that participate in the program required to pay teachers for overtime at rates provided in the scale? That would be the minimum salary and salary schedule document.
Yeah, so again, we are requiring that the minimum salaries be considered regular salaries, the regular rate of pay for teachers and assistant teachers. They are not supplemental payments, they are not bonuses, which means that employees who are required to receive overtime as laid out in the Fair Labor Standards Act, which includes most employees of childcare and preschool facilities, they must be paid at least 1.5 times the employee's regular rate of pay after 40 hours of work in a work week.
And a lot of questions around the continuation of this program beyond FY24. Will it continue in FY25? So are there sufficient funds to administer the program for the entirety of fiscal year 24? And for everyone's reference, fiscal year 24 begins on October 1st, 2023, and will run until September 30th, 2024.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. And you can see the full our cost estimates and projections in the CDF payroll formula funding document. What OSSI has done is projected the total costs of the payroll formula payments to facilities to be in the range of $46 to $70 million for fiscal year 24. We projected those costs based on 2 different calculations: the cost of supplementing teacher salaries based on credentials currently held by educators, and the cost of supplementing teacher salaries once all educators meet the new credential requirements that will be in effect in December, as of December 2nd, 2023. So we know that the cost of the Pay Equity Fund will increase as additional teachers earn their credentials and degrees. Based on the cost estimations that we've done and the fiscal year 24 funding level for the Pay Equity Fund, we do anticipate sufficient funding in fiscal year 24 to support implementation of the minimum early childhood salaries. And I would also add that the Pay Equity Fund was created as an ongoing program, and so it does not have a sunset date. OSSI will continue to administer the program as funds are available.
Thank you. And questions around pay. Some people wondering, does this mean that this will fully cover their staff's pay? So will a facility's child development formula payroll funding formula award cover the entire cost of salaries to meet the minimum salary requirements?
The formula awards are meant to help facilities reach the minimum salary requirements. So they are wage supplements. What OSSI did was to look across the district at the average teacher salaries, and using that figure, we are providing the difference between the average teacher salary and those new minimum salary requirements that will be in place. So child development facilities will receive CDF payroll formula funding in order to add that to their own funding to be able to meet those required salaries. I also want to add that we will not expect child development facilities to meet the minimum salaries until after they've received their first quarterly payment. So we will not look for compliance with those salary requirements until the funds have been received.
And that flows in nicely to the next question I'm seeing here. When do minimum salaries need to go in effect if a program decides to opt into the program?
So OSSI will be providing more detailed timeline on the process of opting in, on the deadlines for making sure that information is inputted into DELT in order to run those formula calculations, and the timing to expect the first payments. So again, we will not expect facilities to comply with the minimum salary requirements until they've received their funding, but we will also have a monitoring process in place once those funds go out to ensure that compliance with that requirement.
And regarding documentation for use of funds, so say a facility opts in, they receive their quarterly payments, what type of documentation will they need to be submitting to OSSI as part of this process?
So the CDF payroll formula fund awards will be received, and if you go back, think back to the beginning of the presentation, we showed the use of the funds, which are pretty broad. They can be used for staff salaries, they can be used for other operating expenses. Facilities will not have to provide detailed documentation. You will not have to submit for reimbursement for expenses. This is a formula award that you will receive and be able to use to support the costs of the salary requirements and expenses of your childcare facility.
Can I add to that? I'm sorry.
Please do.
Additionally, though, you will have to provide information regarding staff salaries to ensure that you are providing the right payment amounts, to ensure that staff are receiving the salary amounts that are required by OSSI. So that part of the money and payments will be monitored and audited.
Thank you. A lot of questions again around if staff are changing or earning new credentials. I know we touched on that a bit earlier, but Hannah, can you reiterate how that will work? So if a staff member gets a credential at the beginning or in the middle of a quarter, will that be adjusted later on?
Sure. So the payroll formula will be calculated 4 times a year. We will not make any adjustments to award amounts between quarterly calculations and payments. However, when an employee achieves a new credential or degree, that information should be updated in DELT, and we will use that updated information in DELT when we recalculate the award amount in the next quarter. So all changes that happen between quarterly payments will be accounted for in the calculation in the next quarter.
Mm-hmm. And if a teacher does not have a credential and they're currently working towards it, do they have what they need to meet the minimum pay requirements?
So the awards will be calculated based on the highest credential or degree that a teacher currently holds. So if they currently hold a CDA, but are working on their associate's degree, the facility will receive a wage supplement for that teacher that is equivalent to the CDA wage supplement. They will not receive the wage supplement for the AA degree until that degree has been completed. And again, once the degree is completed, the facility should make sure that they've updated staffing information in DELT in order to be able to have that teacher receive the updated wage supplement when the quarterly award is calculated.
Thank you. And there are a lot of questions around how exactly we will be determining educator staff type. Again, I would just reiterate what Hannah just said. It will be based off of the information we have in DELT. So that will be on their staff type, and the credential that they hold will be from the Division of Early Learning Licensing tool. So this is a plug to start looking at your records there. Another question we have here. So for instance, if a center is licensed for say 80 slots, but they only have 40 children currently registered and attending class, and 10 of those children receive subsidized care, what how is the adjustment calculated? Is it based off of their total license capacity or based off of their current registration in their facility?
So OSSI will be calculating the equity adjustment based on the subsidy enrollment and the licensed capacity of a program. So it will not be based on the number of children that are currently registered. It will be based on that full licensed capacity of 80 children in that example.
Got it. Another question, and this is related to the subsidy program. Will this program change the way that facilities receive their subsidy funds if they are a subsidy provider?
No, the Pay Equity Fund is an entirely separate program. So facilities that receive subsidy may choose to participate in the Pay Equity Fund, and they will receive an equity adjustment as participants in the Pay Equity Fund, but there is no impact on how subsidy funds are received.
Another question, this one related to subsidy again. Do children who are enrolled in PKEEP who receive subsidy count in the total subsidy enrollment count for the equity calculation?
We will be including the total subsidy enrollment in the equity adjustment. So that includes all children who are receiving subsidy, regardless of whether they are enrolled in PKEEP. I will just remind folks that in terms of how the legislation defines eligible teachers and assistant teachers, PKEEP teachers will not be included in the calculation of the base award for a facility, but PKEEP assistant teachers will be included in the calculation of the base award.
Let's see, another question. If a child development home participates in the subsidy program, but does not currently have any children enrolled in the subsidy program who attend their facility, do they still qualify to participate in the Pay Equity program in fiscal year 24?
Yeah, so in that scenario, if a facility is participating in the Pay Equity Fund and that at the time of a calculation for one of the quarters of fiscal year 24, there is no subsidy enrollment, then their equity adjustment would be zero. They would still be receiving the base award and the administrative enhancement, but they would not receive the equity adjustment. If subsidy enrollment increases over the course of that following quarter, then the next quarter, when the payment award is recalculated, there would be an equity adjustment included as well.
We're continuing to read through some of these. We're getting this question again. What if you participate in subsidy and don't have any subsidy children enrolled? So that would be a similar answer. Let's see, other questions we have received. What if a facility is unable to reach the required minimum salaries with their CDF payroll funding formula and the current pay?
So a requirement of participating in the program is to meet those minimum salary requirements. As Eva said, we will be monitoring for compliance with those salary requirements. We will also be putting out more information as we go forward on what would happen if a program was not in compliance with any requirements of the Pay Equity Fund.
Will quarterly payments be reimbursed, or will they be upfront payments based on the data that is pulled from DELT in the subsidy program?
So quarterly payments will be issued 4 times a year. Because we will not monitor compliance with the minimum salary requirements until after the first quarterly payment is received, you can consider those upfront payments to help meet the costs of the minimum salaries. So this is a different way of giving out funding compared to if you're participating in subsidy and receive reimbursement for children who are enrolled in the subsidy program who are attending. These quarterly payments will be going out automatically to programs that are enrolled in the Pay Equity Fund.
And I'm seeing some questions around how often payments will be calculated. Can you just reiterate that?
4 times a year. The first payroll calculation will occur at the beginning of fiscal year 24, which begins October 1. And then we will put out a detailed timeline with when those calculations will occur throughout the year very soon.
And similar to the timeline for submitting documentation and when awards will be calculated, are there any dates available for when the funds will actually be distributed to facilities?
We will be putting out a timeline as soon as we can with when those payments will be going out to facilities.
Mm-hmm. We had a request to reiterate use of funds, essentially that question that we had around our directors, assistant directors, and other administrative staff eligible to receive funds through the program in fiscal year 24. Could you reiterate that answer?
Sure. So staff, the payroll formula award will be calculated based on the number of teachers and assistant teachers. However, once a facility receives payroll formula awards, they may use them to cover the salaries or wages of other employees of their child development facility, so long as they are meeting minimum salary requirements for eligible teachers and assistant teachers. So facilities have discretion in how they use the total award, which again does include the administrative enhancement, which we've projected to give some additional resources to facilities, as well as that equity adjustment for those that are eligible to receive.
And some questions around staff who might be employed at a facility either through a third-party agency or who are contractors. So if a center has an assistant teacher or a lead teacher who is who's been contracted to work at the facility through a third party, will they be included in the number of staff in the base award?
So, oh, sorry, Hannah, I didn't want to butt in. So the specifics of the Pay Equity Fund are the people who are eligible are actually direct employees of the child development facility. So if you are utilizing a temporary agency to meet staff to child ratios, those individuals that are not direct employees of your program that you are not directly paying and can provide proof of payroll information for your staff are not included in the funding and should not be included in your DELT information unless they are specifically direct employees of your facility.
And another question that's probably related to DELT. So how would you calculate for a director, or would a director be included in a calculation if they are a full-time lead teacher in the classroom, but also a director?
So I'll let Hannah take over, but the calculation is based on staff type in DELT. And every facility director assigned.
Eva, your connection's a little in and out. I think we'll move on to our next question, but I think the answer there was that it was based off of your information in DELT, in that all facilities must have a director. Let's see, another question related to calculating the subsidy enrollment as part of that equity adjustment. So are school age before and after care children who are in the subsidy program included in the calculation for the equity adjustment?
Yes, the equity adjustment will be calculated based on all children enrolled in the subsidy program on the date prescribed by OSSI for the quarterly calculation.
Let's see, another question related to payments. So would the funds be paid via ACH or would it be checks sent in the mail? Any insight on how the payments will actually take place?
Did we lose Eva? It's a question for her.
Yes, I think we did just, oh, she's back. Eva, we just had a question about how the payments will be taking place. So will facilities receive them through ACH payments, through checks?
So facilities will be paid, facilities will have to register in the district financial information system. And we'll put out more information on how to do that in the near future. And however you decide to sign up for that program, you could either provide a check for ACH payments, or you can get a paper check. So it just depends on how you sign up and the information you provide when you sign up for the payment system. And if you are already participating in subsidy, you'll likely receive the payment in the same form that you receive it now.
And let's see, a few questions related to staff type. So are home caregivers and associate home caregivers included in the calculation for a facility? Are they included in the CDF payroll funding formula?
Yes, the legislation for the payroll formula defines a teacher to include home caregivers and expanded home caregivers, and for assistant teachers to include associate home caregivers. So all of those positions will be included with the appropriate wage supplements in the calculation of the payroll formula.
And what about if a facility has substitutes? Substitutes are listed in DELT, their staff type is substitute. Would they be included in a facility CDF payroll funding formula?
No, the calculation is based on the staff type that is in DELT and the qualifications that each person has in DELT. So even if you change one staff type from substitute to teacher, they would have to have the appropriate qualifications to correlate with that specific staff type for the record to be approved in DELT. And
looks like we lost Eva again, is experiencing a few technical difficulties, but I believe the answer to that question
I'll
was
note
that
here that as you update your information in DELT for your staff.
All right, we will move on to our next question. Hannah, this is one for you. We have some folks asking about the salary schedule. So I know we talked a lot about the minimum salaries, but what about the salary schedule that's also included in there? How does it relate to this program?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So for those who aren't sure what we're talking about when we're referring to the salary schedule, if you look at the document that's called fiscal year 24 minimum salaries and salary schedule, in addition to those minimum salaries that we've put up on slides, there is an example of a salary schedule, which has specific steps that are intended to align with years of experience. That's how a salary schedule typically works. That aligns with, again, the DCPS salary schedule, which does account for increases in steps related to years of experience. We want to be very clear that the requirement for participating in the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund is to meet minimum salary requirements that are step 1 of that salary schedule. A facility is not required to pay their teachers in accordance with that full salary schedule. A child development facility may choose to use their own salary schedule, but what we are going to be looking for is compliance with that step 1. So the rest of the salary schedule is an example or a recommendation to facilities to think about how they would implement a full salary schedule.
Mm-hmm. Another question related to the formula, and I think this one is specific to the wage supplement, but how was that wage supplement created? What did OSSI do to establish what that wage supplement is for each staff type and corresponding credential?
Yeah, good question. So a number of things. So we took into consideration a lot of different points of data. Two that were primarily was the childcare provider survey that went out in the fall. So one of the questions on the survey was around staff salaries. So we looked at the responses to the salaries. We also did some analysis based on OSSI's childcare cost modeling to be able to look at salaries in that respect as well. That is how we then came up with what we consider an average teacher salary. We understand that there is a lot of variation in the salaries that individual facilities pay to their employees. However, we do not have the capacity to tailor our wage supplements to the circumstances of every individual facility. So we had to come up with an average salary. The wage supplement then is the difference between that average salary, so the population-wide, the average salary for teachers and assistant teachers across the district, and the minimum salary requirements.
Thank you. Another question, again, related to eligibility, are PKEEP assistant teachers included in the calculation for a CDF payroll funding formula award?
Yes, PKEEP assistant teachers were included in the definition of eligible assistant teachers. So PKEEP teachers will be included in the formula calculation and also will be required to meet minimum salary requirements. PKEEP lead teachers were not included in the legislation and will not be included in the calculation.
Thank you. And again, seeing questions specifically related to the steps in the salary scale, could you just reiterate one more time about how that salary scale should be used by facilities?
Sure. The full salary schedule included in the published document is a recommendation to facilities. Facilities must meet the minimum salary requirements that were included in this presentation, that are included in the table in the document, and that are step 1 of the full salary schedule.
Thank you. I'm seeing some questions about if staff have credentials. This specific question is about if they received a bachelor's degree from outside the US. I would encourage this person to reach out to the ECE help desk. They can see about having those credentials verified. And we do have some programs available through DC Lead if they are enrolled in that program to have any information translated related to transcripts. So advice there would be to reach out to the ECE help desk to make sure you have all the information you need in advance of opting in for your staff. All right, we have touched on a number of topics and questions. Again, I think one of our most popular ones here that we might close out with, Hannah, can you just reiterate when we are expecting to have more information on timeline? So timeline for opting in and expected timing for payments.
Sorry. Yes, we will be providing a timeline in the very near future We will be beginning the process of programs opting in this summer. The calculations will begin in fiscal year 24, so in October of this year, and facilities will receive payments after that, which again, will provide more specific dates and timelines very soon.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for submitting your questions in the chat. If you have follow-up questions, please send those our way to aussie.delcommunications@dc.gov, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. We will also be using questions that we received today to inform updates to our future FAQs. I also flagged that we have another session similar to this one planned for Saturday at 9 a.m. So feel free to tune into that as well. Before handing things over to Eva, I would like to request that if you are tuned in on one of our language channels, so if you are watching on the Spanish language channel or the Amharic language channel, if you can please just type in the chat which one you are attending, that would be very helpful. So if you're on Spanish, just you can type in Espanol or Spanish, and same for Amharic. And with that, I will hand things over to Eva.
Thanks, Julia. I think we couldn't do our poll, correct? I didn't remember whether or not we could do our poll.
We can do this poll, yes.
Okay. So we'd like you to participate in a short poll before we go. It's up on the screen before closing. The question is, does your facility plan to participate in FY24 of the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund? The options are yes, no, and I'm unsure. We'll give you a few minutes to respond. All
Let's
right.
see, we have about half of our attendees have responded, and it looks like 3/4 are saying yes, that they're planning to respond. Others are unsure, but we don't have any no's. So we're happy to hear that. I'll hand things over to you, Eva, to close out.
Thanks, Julia. In the next few weeks, or in the coming weeks, leaders from child development facilities can expect more information on the process of opting in to the Early Childhood Educator Pay Equity Fund for FY24. This will include guides and additional information sessions, as well as technical assistance for providers who want to opt in. And we'll also provide some resources for communicating with staff about the changes to the program. So thank you everyone who has joined today's information session. Julia will provide information in the chat where you can get more information, the current FAQ, the information about the funding formula that's already been shared. And for any questions that you have that didn't get answered today, please submit them to aussie.delcommunications email, and we'll do the best we can to get back to you as soon as possible or add that information to the next iteration of the FAQs that we put out. Thank you again for attending today. A recording of the session will be shared with child development facility leaders in the coming days. Thank you very much.